Council workshop. City Clerk Sint, could you do the roll call for us?
Councilmember Juniman.
Here.
Councilmember Knudsen.
Here.
Councilmember Villavicencio.
Here.
Councilmember Cave.
Here.
Mayor Abrams.
I am here as I croak out my presence. Sorry, everyone. Thank you for that. Is there a motion to approve the agenda for tonight?
I move approval.
Second.
Moved by Juniman, seconded by Knudsen, the motion to approve the agenda. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, then let's go to a vote. And tonight our order is going to be Councilmember Juniman, Councilmember Knudsen, Councilmember Villavicencio, and Councilmember Cave. Councilmember Juniman.
Aye.
Councilmember Knudsen.
Aye.
Councilmember Villavicencio.
Aye.
Councilmember Cave.
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. Tonight we have no unfinished business. We have some new business reports. The first one is our Multicultural Advisory Committee and the Maplewood Organization for Racial Equity, or our MORE team. And I believe, I think we're doing the MAC first, which will be Lieutenant Beardeman, if I'm not correct.
Thank you, Mayor. Was my mic working all right?
It is. We can hear you. Thank you.
Perfect. I've had some issues with it. All right. Well, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. For those of you who do not know me, I'm Lieutenant Brian Beardeman with the Maplewood Police Department. I just want to start out by thanking the Council for giving me this opportunity to come tonight and discuss some of the exciting things the MAC has done over the last year, despite it being a challenging year. For those, let's see, I think that's working now. Just overall, the Multicultural Advisory Committee, the mission of the MAC is really to enhance communication and understanding between law enforcement officers and our multicultural residents. We want to build trust, opening lines of communication, and it will ultimately improve the safety and livability of our community. MAC committee members and the Maplewood Police Department work collaboratively to enhance and strengthen relationships between the police and the community, specifically with immigrants, people of color, Indigenous people, and the faith community. So that's an overview of the mission of the MAC, and we'll talk a little bit about the history and how we got here and some of the things we've been working on. So for council members who may not be fully aware of what the MAC is and maybe weren't here for some of the previous things that we've done, I'll just do a brief recount of that. So about 5.5 years ago, then Chief Paul Schnell created a use of force work group. And the Use of Force Advisory Commission, really what their job was is reviewing department use of force policy and procedures, which was really in light of the Philando Castile shooting. Throughout this process, we really began to forge meaningful relationships with these members and members of the police department as we work through these common goals of transparency and policy and policing. The commission's goals, however, were very focused and very narrow, and the priorities of this commission were to complete this department process, and once that was completed, the job of that committee or commission was done. And so we really felt it important to keep that momentum going and really build off the successes that we've had with that commission. And so moving forward from that point on, the council created the Maplewood Police Advisory Commission, better known as the PAC. We started the PAC. Within the first year, it became very evident to both the PAC members as well as the admin and officers that sat on these meetings that due to open meeting laws of the commission, it really hindered the open and honest and natural discussions that we wanted to have and really form those relationships with the members. And it made having those difficult conversations even more difficult. Being commissioned also made it difficult, if not impossible, to conduct fluid meetings in exigent circumstances and in varying locations, such as where we wanted to have some of these meetings in the police department. So we began to do some research. We began to research best practices for citizen advisory groups and found that multicultural advisory committees, or better known as the MAC, to be really the most fitting. Some cities west of the river, such as Columbia Heights and Hopkins, currently have a MAC. Lieutenant Buzek and myself began to attend some of these meetings. We began to speak to some of the citizens on these meetings and also some of the administrators running the meetings. And really found that the relationships we formed during the Use of Force Advisory Commission were really the same process was being formed through the MAC. And so I began to get very excited about the potential to have the MAC replace the PAC as something that we really could use in our city. The second part of that was examining recommendation of 21st century policing, which really states that law enforcement agencies should work collaboratively with community members, specifically those who are disproportionately affected by crime. And so we checked that box. The third spot we checked was really reviewing our strategic plan and the Maplewood Police Department mission, which really overall directs us to focus on involving community partners to provide successful communication, info sharing with underrepresented populations. So based on all three of those things, we really thought that the MAC was the best direction to go. And a recommendation was drafted to the City Council to move from the Police Advisory Commission model to a Multicultural Advisory Committee model, which was then accepted by the council. I was part of the original use of force work group. I was also part of the Police Advisory Commission. So I really felt that I had formed some of these relationships already. And so I felt that I really wanted to be part of the MAC, and I began getting excited about the MAC. So I volunteered to oversee the creation and supervision of the MAC going forward. Recruitment began in 2020 for the MAC. The only thing that they needed for recruitment was they needed to live, worship, work, or have just some connection to the city of Maplewood. Through recruitment, we created flyers, we did social media blast outs, trying to really get some excitement and join the MAC. We also had officers go out in the community in places they had already formed some of these connections with the citizens and try to recruit. And we also went into some of the churches, mosques, and religious areas to also recruit for the MAC. So the MAC was formed. We had our 14 diverse candidates that were signed up for the MAC in 2020. We are represented by American Indians, white, black, Hmong, Karen, and our partners from the mosque. And then we all know we had the plan to get the MAC going in April, and then COVID-19 hit and really postponed the start of the MAC. It was really kind of sad to see all that work that we had, and it was postponed indefinitely. We didn't know where the pandemic was going to lead, but we knew that due to safety reasons, we just could no longer have these or even start these meetings. So I continued to stay in touch with MAC members, even though I had not met many of them in person yet. We talked about through email what the city was doing for their employees as far as COVID, what we were doing for the citizens, how we were keeping everybody safe, and just to try to keep those relationships going. Then, unfortunately, with the death of George Floyd and civil unrest, I like to say it was the worst and the best time to start the MAC. It was the worst time because of the pandemic and safety reasons, but it was absolutely the best time, and no better time that I can think of to start the MAC. Just because with the death of George Floyd, this is really a time when we really need to reach out to the community and really have that dialogue with the community and citizens and really have those difficult conversations. So we really ran into some significant challenges in 2020, obviously with the civil unrest that made it very difficult for the officers throughout the entire year. The pandemic, obviously for safety reasons, was a big issue. We did have our first meeting that took place in July 2020. We had 2 or 3 meetings that were in person, but due to the pandemic and the governor's shutdowns, we no longer could have those in person. And so switching to the engagement with virtual format, it was very difficult. It's much harder to form relationships with people virtually, as we all know. And there was also some issues with technology. Zoom was kind of new to everybody, so making sure all MAC members had internet access, had the proper technology so they could log in, that they had Zoom accounts, really became a little cumbersome, but we got past it. We did have many meetings virtually. But the big thing about the MAC is we really want MAC members to be in the PD. We want them to feel at home. We want them to see the officers working, see the officers eating, pass them in the hallway, and really form those meaningful relationships with the officers. And so that was some of the significant challenges we had just getting this thing off the ground. Despite those 3 challenges that we just discussed, by all accounts, as far as I'm concerned, the MAC exceeded all expectations, pandemic or not. They really knocked it out of the park, and the things they're doing is really amazing in my opinion. I'm just gonna spend the next couple minutes going through some of the things the MAC has done. So the MAC engaged with police staff and formed relationships, and it seems like that would be difficult during the pandemic, and it was, but as you'll see soon, when I talk about some of the accomplishments we had, we were able to accomplish many of those things. The MAC partnered with public safety at multiple community events. Not only did they attend the events, they also brought us into their communities to have pop-up events. They wouldn't just meet us at the events, they would meet us at the police department. They would ride with an officer to the events. While they were en route, they would discuss the community, they would discuss why we do community outreach events. They would wear name tags saying they're a member of the Multicultural Advisory Committee, which would then spur conversations with the public as to what that was and the benefits of that. Then they also provide a lot of input and guidance. It's important for us to not just talk to the MAC and tell them what we're doing, to really get their input and value their input. So they gave us a lot of input on one of our major things is our Maplewood Police Strategic Plan. So we spent 2 separate meetings. The first meeting, we explained to them what the strategic plan was, why we had it. And the second meeting, they came back and they had a lot of input for us on how we can better reach out to their community and reach out to stakeholders and what they felt we should have in our strategic plan that was important to them. The second thing, they gave us a lot of input on the embedded social worker, which we are very proud of currently working with us. The county wanted input from citizens, and what better place to have citizen input than a multicultural advisory committee. So we conducted a meeting about the embedded social worker and really talked about that. They've done work with us for recruiting. They've talked to our MORE team, who you'll hear from later, on how the city overall they felt could do a better job of recruiting or is doing a good job with recruiting. And they talked about the police department. We've talked about our recruiting and how really we can continue to recruit the non-traditional employees and really employees that match our demographics in the city. So they've done a lot of work with that as well. We've also started what I've called the cultural spotlight. So the last cultural spotlight we had was an imam from the mosque, came in and talked about the Muslim religion and a bunch of the cultural norms and really what the officers can expect when they go on certain calls. And it was so well received that we're going to do more. The next one we have planned is Karen Cultural Spotlight. And as far as the mosque one, we are going to present that to all the cops at a future in-service because we felt it was so well done. One of the things that was really great is that, you know, police departments, police departments are of people. So the most important thing a police department can do is hire the right people. So the MAC has sat, from the creation of the MAC until now, they've sat on every police officer and sergeant interview. And not only do they sit on the interview, but they have a lot of say in who we hire. Their score counts. They have long conversations with us about officers and who we're hiring. They go back to the MAC meetings and discuss what the hiring process was like, what the questions were like, how they'd want the questions phrased, what they felt was important about the process. And then the next part is that the officer that they helped hire then comes in, talks to the MAC. They've met every new officer since the creation of the MAC. And the kind of the neat thing that I felt was that the officer comes in and gives them, you know, personal information about them and why they want to be a cop and why they chose Maplewood and why they're proud to work here. But then what I've seen is the MAC reciprocate that and say, I know policing is a tough thing to do right now, but the MAC has your back and we support the police. And you can just see the smile on the face of the new officer because they know they're being supported by not just the police department of the city, but the citizens as well. Another thing we did this year was ride-alongs. So ride-alongs were canceled due to the pandemic for everybody except for the MAC. We felt that it was so important for them to get to know the officers despite the pandemic that we did allow ride-alongs. We had one MAC member, I think she's probably on her 6th ride-along now. She continues to go. She loves them. She has a certain officer that she's wants to ride for the last 3 times. So they've done ride-alongs. They discussed policing. I've heard back from the officers how they enjoyed the ride-alongs. I've heard that reciprocated from the MAC members on some of the things the cops are going through, and they couldn't believe how they're treated in the street. And so really it's a great back and forth. And then the other thing I think is really important is one of our MAC members was recently recruited as a community service officer. He saw some of the things we're doing in our city. He was impressed with our police department, wanted to know how he could be a part of that as maybe a reserve or something of that nature. And we had an opening for community service officer. I talked about that. He put in and he got hired for that. And in the police department, we call it building the bench. We want to bring in community service officers and get them trained in the city and get them acclimated to the city. And at some point, we build the bench and want them to become one of our full-time officers. So yeah, he now has an interest in law enforcement, and we're hopefully building the bench on that. And one of our more recent things we did that I'm very proud of the MAC is they hosted a public forum on human trafficking. So we partnered with the BCA. They came in and they discussed human trafficking, sex trafficking, what to look for, how it affects different cultures. Then we had our partners at Tubman discuss some of the victimology of it. If the MAC members or anybody could go back to their community and if they were to notice any of this, what they can do for resources and help. And we also had Mayor Abrams speak on this too. So it was a great overall thing. It was sponsored by the MAC. They did some of the heavy lifting on it and it was well received. It was also put on our Facebook for anybody to watch after the fact. So going forward, I personally believe this is just the tip of the iceberg. With all the things that we dealt with through the pandemic and the death of George Floyd and the things we were able to accomplish, I think the sky's the limit with this group. They're a group of caring people. They're a group that cares about the city. They care about the police department. And we're just really looking forward to in-person meetings to really forge those relationships even further than we have already. Recruitment continues. We have 14 members currently. That's not a set in stone number. In fact, I had a young man call me several weeks ago to discuss how he was basically a call that the sergeant and he dealt with, and he wanted a question/complaint on the sergeant. We ended up talking about that. He wanted to know how he can better understand policing, and we talked for about 2 hours on the phone, and one thing led to another, and he signed up for the MAC, and he's now starting next month as one of our new MAC members, which is exciting. And the last thing I want to say is that cities and police departments are noticing what we're doing. I've had 6 presentations so far, just from the summer until now, to city managers of other cities and other police departments. They're seeing what we're doing. They're hearing from MAC members who are talking to other people who are getting back to police chiefs and other city managers of other cities. And they want what we have and they want to know how to start it. So I've done up to 6 presentations so far and try to get other departments going. And I can't think of a better thing than having, every police department having a MAC and really reaching out to the citizens, and that's got to be a good thing. I just think that they're going to do big things, and this is really just the beginning. And I look forward to what they can do moving forward. That's the end of my presentation. I can hold for questions till the end of the more presentation, or I can answer some now as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lieutenant. That is really helpful. I think we're getting some feedback, and I'm sounding much worse than I actually am. Okay, we'll try that again. I know my notes show that Chief Mondor was also identified as a presenter on the MAC. Chief Mondor, is there anything else that you wanted to add?
Mayor Abrams, there's nothing that I would add to the MAC report. We had just done this jointly where Mike Sable and I will speak to the MORE team and thought that this highlighted our kind of multifaceted approach to these challenges.
Perfect. Okay, then I think it makes more sense to do a quick round robin with the council members concerning the MAC. I want to thank you, Lieutenant, for the presentation. It was inspiring, and I think this is really a great asset for our community. So let's talk with other council members and see if anyone has any other questions. Councilmember Juniman.
Thank you, Mayor. No questions, but that was a great presentation, Brian. It was wonderful. And it's energizing to just see what's going on. And you did it in spite of all the limitations of the world in the last year and some months. But I imagine it's very exciting to think of doing it in person. And I'm so glad that other places are asking you about it too. Does it surprise me that Maplewood's on the forefront? No, not unusual. But this is a really great thing to spread. And I think it's the first time I can say I actually feel like we as a community are working together to make sure that everyone has something to say. And it's not that we haven't thought about it or tried in the past, but this is an action that is really paying off. So thank you for working with this group and for pulling it forward. I think it's fabulous. I absolutely think it's probably one of the best things we've ever done.
Thank you for those comments. Councilmember Knudsen.
Yeah, I don't have a question, just an interesting comment. I listened to NPR this morning, interviewing the mayor of Brooklyn Park or Brooklyn Center. And he was describing his vision and immediate vision, meaning going to the council tonight with community policing, public safety department, talking about a commission. And I was just thinking that as I reread the presentation early this morning, I thought, wow, we got all the things that they're hoping for, in a very difficult situation. So I applaud what you've done there, and thank you so much, Lieutenant.
Thank you. Councilmember Villavicencio.
Yes, I just want to applaud Lieutenant Beardman and all the other leaders that had, the ability to have these difficult conversations. And I think that we are on the right track. And so thank you all so much for doing this work. And, one comment I guess that I would, ask is maybe at one of the cultural spotlights, there could be a spotlight on like seniors, people with disabilities, the LGBTQ plus community, or youth. I think when we think of the most marginalized folks in our community, those definitely hit that mark. And so I think it would be great for us to include those folks too. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Councilmember Cave.
Yes, no questions, just a comment. Lieutenant Beardman, I think you did a fantastic job. This whole committee is just fantastic. And I'm looking forward to seeing what 2021 brings. It sounds like you guys already have a great start, which is super good. I know you mentioned it. While this is such a hard time, it's such a perfect time for this committee to, go ahead. And it sounds like you have people that are coming along, and I look forward to getting the community even more engaged in this now that we can do more visual and getting together. And I want to see, I can't wait to see what this becomes. So thank you.
Thank you, Lieutenant, and thank you, fellow council members. I want to thank all of the MAC members as well for their willingness to participate and to really lend their voices to our community, because that is such an important thing. And I'm just so thrilled that we've got the MAC and that it's up and running during these challenging times. It is a great resource and a great asset for Maplewood. So moving on, we have Chief Mondor and we have Assistant City Manager Mike Sable talking about the MORE team update. Gentlemen, I don't know which one is going first, but I'll turn it over to you.
Mayor, members of the council, thank you for having us this evening. Here to talk to you about the MORE team, or the Maplewood Organization for Racial Equity. The MORE team is guided by the City of Maplewood's strategic priority of community inclusiveness, where staff are guided to create a city where everyone's valued, respected, and where we can celebrate our strengths as an organization and as a community. Our primary focus over the past several years has been community engagement, employee training and engagement, and HR and hiring practices. A little bit of history about the MORE team. The team was established in 2017 after several staff had participated in the Government Alliance on Race and Equity with several other communities. The committee seeks to recommend policies and actions to move the city towards better representing and serving our community. And we believe that we're able to accomplish that by focusing on these three primary goals. While this is a staff-led initiative, we want to work hand in hand with the MAC and not duplicate efforts. And that's some of the things that we're working on in 2021 and into the future. Starting with community engagement. It is in the strategic plan, emphasizing accessibility and progress assessments. Our goal is to have 80% of benefit earning employees participate in city-sponsored community events annually. And we're continuing to work on improving in that area and have seen dramatic improvements throughout the past couple of years. What we found initially was that engagement opportunities vary greatly between departments, and not all departments had the same level of opportunities to engage with our residents in a kind of outside of their normal work setting. And moving forward, we want to be intentional about creating opportunities while setting engagement goals for staff and have better coordinated delivery of events. As recently as 2019, we had different departments each doing similar events, such as a bike rodeo. And through the MORE team, we've been able to better coordinate with public safety, Parks and Rec, Public Works, other departments throughout the city to ensure that we have participation opportunities for staff and that our events are coordinated and non-duplicative. One good example of how we've done this recently was where we identified some barriers to how public works staff could participate in events, as a majority of their everyday work is done by the public works staff in the community. It's sometimes difficult for them to engage in non-formal settings because it would shut down an entire crew within the public works team. Through the MORE team and the city council, we were able to work with Public Works and have an entire crew work through the same event. And we did so most recently in the city's partnership with the food drive with the YMCA, and all Public Works crews were able to join in and appreciated the opportunity, and were able to experience that next level of engagement. And we continue to look for ways that we can non-traditionally have staff engage the community. Employee training and engagement. Some of the initiatives where we've made strides over the past couple of years are the LEAD Academy, where there's a dedicated section to diversity, equity, and inclusion, focused workshops in individual departments. And we're currently working to identify future training and education opportunities. This winter, the fire department leadership team underwent a focused workshop focusing specifically on how the fire department can better be representative of the community and understand where our blind spots are, and continue to grow recruitment, retention, and inclusion efforts. Another thing that we're focused on is hiring practices. One of the group's goals is to increase the percentage of employees of color among city staff by 2% each year. The police department pathways program, the fire department is working on a program that has basically copied the Metro-wide police pathways program. Police and fire have worked to build the bench. I know Lieutenant Beardeman had made mention of that, and Chief Nadeau has really furthered that phrase, but also delivering on that message throughout the police and fire department. So the police department's community service officer program and the fire department's fire and EMS cadet program create opportunities for non-traditional applicants and we've also worked to challenge some of the historical recruitment and hiring strategies, and evaluated what barriers exist to having people enter the workforce. And while we feel like we've just scratched the surface on that topic, the preliminary success of the entry-level programs for police and fire, we're looking at how these initiatives can be approached throughout the city while maintaining progress with existing initiatives. Another item that we focused on is program evaluation. So we've asked each department to focus to complete our equity evaluation form on at least 2 departmental programs, facilities, or essential operations through the lens of equity. Most recent examples when we started to pilot this program were diversity, equity, inclusion questions and scoring criteria on selection for an architect and construction manager for the North Fire Station project, excuse me. So in 2021, each department will use this form to have a conversation about how departmental programs, how facilities, other operations are being delivered, and where are blind spots, and how can we make recommendations to better serve the community and be more inclusive. Some of the next steps We've spent the past few years as a MORE team with staff with very good intentions and trying to build on some of the momentum that we've experienced through our partnerships and various programs. But recently we conducted a gap analysis in hopes of increasing effort and attention on these initiatives and increasing overall organizational participation while furthering our connection with the community. The MORE team is currently working on engaging subject matter experts to review, assess, and evaluate recommended key strategic action items for the MORE team, advise and recommend outreach strategies to engage key stakeholders, working on strengthening the staff's cultural understanding and cultural agility and working with residents, businesses, and other stakeholders. And we're looking for someone to provide expertise to build staff capacity and support efforts to embed a racial equity lens within our day-to-day work. And so we've spent significant amount of time over the past couple of years continuing to try to build that connection with community, and believe that having someone with some of that built-in expertise to help consult with some of our projects will help us further ingrain that into our culture and be able to better deliver these services in the community. And with that, I would open up to any feedback or questions.
Thank you, Chief Mondor. That is a great report. Councilmember Juniman, do you have any questions or comments?
No questions, but again, another really nice, really good presentation. Thank you a lot, Mike. And I do think you have crossed what I call the line between talking about it and doing it. And I know that's a difficult thing. And so I think MORE is moving forward, if you will, in a everyday way. And I really applaud the fact that you did the two things that impressed me are the focused workshops, and I know that the city manager has been doing Lead Academy with different departments, and I'm glad to know that you're doing a unity and diversity and inclusion. But the gap analysis is really important too, and I think it gives you a good direction of where you're going. But I think this is already paying off in the community, because when you pre-pandemic, when we even had some of the park events and there were police and firefighters there, particularly the kids, but everybody flocks around you. And so it's there, the interest in you is there. And so if you can look a little more like the community and you do outreach, I think everybody's going to be happier and better served. So thank you for this. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Knudsen.
Just a comment. What's interesting is we're not reacting to an acute event. Like I mentioned before, Brooklyn Center is trying to rush and get through it. I'm not criticizing them. That's the right thing to do. But we're very proactive, and I think we can embed all these great connections in the community, which will ultimately, I think, keep the peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Knudsen. Councilmember Villavicencio.
No questions. Thank you for everything you've done on this again. And I definitely agree with Councilmember Knudsen about, it's really important for us to be proactive as opposed to reactive. So thank you all.
Councilmember Cave.
It's always worse when you're last because everyone says everything. You guys have done a great job on the council here. So I want to say all my colleagues, you've really made great comments, and I agree with everything. And I look forward to 2021 with you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you again for that presentation. Thank you to all of the employees who participate with the MORE initiative. What's really quite remarkable about Maplewood is that we don't just talk about things, we actually take action steps. And we certainly evolve and change, always looking for the best practices as to what's going to be the very best for our community. So staff, this is a great initiative, and I really, truly appreciate all of your efforts. So we have our next presentation on the Climate Adaptation Plan, which again is another initiative that is really points out that Maplewood is far and ahead of so many cities. Tonight, I think it's going to be Sean Finwall and Ted Redmond. Ted is with Pale Blue Dot. They're going to be our presenters tonight. I have to say that the report that we got in our council packet was so incredibly thorough and detailed and fascinating information. So Sean, I think I'll start with you as the staff representative here. Do you want to cue this up for us?
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. Sean Finwall here, environmental planner. It's nice to be back before the council, even if in voice only. So it's good to see you all, or I guess hear from you all. So tonight we will be discussing the climate adaptation plan. This all started with the city's work on the 2040 comprehensive plan and our climate and energy goals. With these important goals in place, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency granted the city of Maplewood an environmental assistance grant for climate adaptation planning. That grant covers climate risk and vulnerabilities review, community engagement, climate adaptation strategy development and prioritization, the climate adaptation plan, which we will be reviewing tonight, and the climate adaptation communication framework for sharing with the public. So this plan was created over the last 2 years, and it outlines goals and actions to guide the city towards a more resilient, climate change ready condition. It also fulfills the climate adaptation action item identified in the city's 2040 comprehensive plan in our energy and climate planning goals. So after tonight's review, we would like to bring the plan to the May 24th City Council meeting and then submit the plan to the MPCA by June 1st per the grant. So tonight, to present the grant plan is Maplewood's partner, Ted Redmond, who's a co-founder of Pale Blue Dot, and you'll also know him as the city's Environmental and Natural Resources Commissioner. And then also online to answer questions if it comes up is Sean Goshevsky. He's the program director at Resilient Cities and Communities. Sean helped with the outreach portion of the plan. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Ted, who will detail the plan for you. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, everybody. Mayor, members of the council, I appreciate being here tonight with you all. Let me pull up my presentation. Hopefully this comes through okay. All right. So just to kind of quickly, I'm going to try to keep this quick, a little introduction so you know who you're speaking with. Go through the process of the planning effort, the plan framework, and then just highlight some of the key aspects of each of the sectors is really what I'm going to try to focus on this evening. So Pale Blue Dot is a Maplewood firm. We do climate planning. We've done about 50 some odd projects that are community scale projects for climate planning, sustainability, or energy planning efforts. I wanted to touch on why create a climate adaptation plan. And I think one way of looking at that is understanding what might we expect that we should anticipate for adaptation. Looking back, Maplewood has seen since 1950 an increase in over 3 degrees in temperature, an increase in annual precipitation, more importantly, an increase in heavy precipitation events, and a somewhat modest increase in days above 95 and a significant decrease in days below freezing. We've also, over the last 20 years, seen a slight increase in extreme weather events as reported by NOAA. Looking forward through the end of this century, if we do not collectively address the driving aspects of climate change, specifically greenhouse gas emissions globally, we can anticipate an increase, an additional increase in average annual temperature of 5 to 9 degrees. That's an average temperature. Precipitation, the models vary depending on what emissions scenario we look at. Some show a potential decrease in annual precipitation, some show an increase, but they all show an increase in variability, meaning that our rain events will separate, become more further apart. which means that all of the models indicate an increase in heavy precipitation, a significant increase in days above 95, which are important days for us to consider because that's when vulnerable populations are very vulnerable to significant health risk, and a decrease in days below zero and an increase in growing season of over a month or more. And growing season sounds great as we get ready to grow tomatoes, but that's just something we want to keep in mind that also relates to things like mosquitoes. And I like to think of it as our city on the move. By the middle of this century, so just the next 20 to 30 years, our summers will be similar to the summers felt about 300 miles south. So that's similar to picking up the city of Maplewood and moving it south about 10 miles every year, or about 145 feet every day. Another sort of metric is mega rain events. As I've indicated, our heavy precipitations are increasing. Mega rain events are events which drop about 6 inches of rain over 1,000 square miles. They deliver about almost 14 billion cubic feet of water. There have been 15 or 16 of those events. Over half of them have been this century, so in the last 20 years. So what is a climate adaptation plan? An adaptation plan is a comprehensive roadmap. It's similar to a comp plan in that it touches many sectors, and it outlines specific strategies and actions to implement to protect people and places and reduce their vulnerability to those climate change impacts. This plan specifically addresses climate adaptation, but it does not address climate change mitigation, which is the reduction of climate change impacts through reducing the flow of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. The reason for that really is just rooted in the funding source. This project was funded through an MPCA grant, and they were capable of funding adaptation, but not capable of funding mitigation planning. The effort included community engagement and outreach. There were 2 rounds. The first round occurred in the summer of 2019 through March of 2020. The second was this year, and that reviewed the draft climate adaptation plan through February, March, and April. Through those engagement efforts, the community feedback we received, over 77% of respondents are very concerned. 16% of them being extremely concerned, 17% being very concerned, and 60% being extremely concerned about climate change. And when reviewing the adaptation plan that you have before you now, the responses had about 71% of agreeing completely, 24% agreeing mostly or somewhat, and then the remaining 4% being neither disagreeing or agreeing or disagreeing completely at 2% there. The process, as Sean talked about, was a 23-month planning timeframe. And I want to definitely highlight that there were 15 planning team members who worked very diligently and very hard at creating this plan. This plan is very much a collaborative product, where those planning team members are really responsible for the content, and they did significant work. And I just want to make sure that we recognize what an effort they put into it. The plan is organized along 8 sectors of climate vulnerabilities, as you can see here, include health and safety, extreme heat, air quality, etc. Within those 8 sectors, or combined, they include 34 strategies to address climate vulnerabilities, and those strategies are supported by 155 actions. And the implementation time frame is anticipated to be a 10-year implementation time frame. So now just to kind of hit some of the highlights of the sectors, I can't give you too much detail in a short time frame, but just want to highlight a few. Oops, I'm sorry. Section 2, which is health and safety, climate health and safety. Through the engagement, we know that over 87% of the respondents reported being personally impacted by the effects of climate change. This sector has 4 strategies, overarching strategies. An example of them is HS1, which is prepare the community for anticipated climate change impacts, as well as HS3, which is engage, educate, and empower the public on health and safety risks of climate change impacts. And example detailed actions that support the strategies include 2.2, which is execute an assessment on the completeness of sidewalks connecting all streets and prioritize an implementation plan. And HS 4-2, which is develop citywide ordinances or policies to encourage, incentivize, or require the reduced use of water-related illness agents such as phosphorus and synthetic nitrogen fertilizers. Section 3 is extreme heat and weather. Through our surveys, we know that 88% of respondents are concerned about extreme heat impacts, and 86% of the respondents were concerned about extreme weather impacts. The sector includes 5 strategies, including number 3, which is implement effective systems and processes to manage and respond to extreme weather events, and 5, which is decrease the urban heat island effect, especially in areas with populations most vulnerable to heat. Key actions include 3.2, which is review debris management plans to support response to severe storm events and flooding, or 5.1, which is develop a policy that requires all housing development projects receiving city funding, PUD approval, or a conditional use permit to implement residential scale heat island mitigation strategies. Section 4 is air quality. Through our surveys, we know that 86% of the respondents are concerned about air quality impacts of climate change, and almost half have been affected by increases in asthma attacks, allergies, or other health impacts due to air quality changes. This section includes 3 strategies, including 1, which is increase and maintain air quality for residents and businesses, and 2, which is to reduce auto-generated particulate matter, tailpipe pollutants, waste heat, and ozone formation. Detailed actions include 1.1, which is work with the Air Quality Management District, MPCA air quality alerts, and Public Health Department to notify schools, community organizations, residents, and businesses of air quality alerts. And 2.1, which is to reduce generation of air pollution and waste heat from mobile sources by promoting, incentivizing public transit, biking, and walking. Section 3 is flooding and water quality. From our survey, we know that 87% of respondents are concerned about water quality impacts in our community. Sector strategies, there are 4 of them, and they include FW1, which is improve community stormwater preparedness and water conservation, as well as FW4, which is increase the resilience of the natural and built environment to impacts of climate change. Example actions include 2.2, which is establish a policy to prioritize open space preservation, actively seeking partnerships and opportunities to increase preservation of green space, including through the review of development and redevelopment. And 4.1, which is to identify and address vulnerabilities in local infrastructure as a result of increased frequency and severity of storms and rainfall and projected changes due to climate change. Section 6 is green space and ecosystem health. We know through our surveys that 87% of the respondents are concerned about tree and ecosystem loss potential of climate impacts. This sector has 4 strategies, including G1, which is the increase to increase the accessibility and quality of habitat for native plants and animals, and G3, which is expand and sustain urban tree canopy and forests. Example actions include 1.3, which is to create a citywide urban forest master plan to establish objectives and best management practices for Maplewood's urban forest. And 3.1, which is to review and revise parking lot shading guidelines and enforcement of increased canopy cover. Section 7 is local food. And we know that 87% of the respondents are concerned about potential food security impacts of climate change. This section has 6 strategic strategies, including F3, which is to increase production of local food, and F5, which is to increase food security for residents, especially those most vulnerable to the food environment. Example actions include F3.2, which is to identify and prioritize locations to create community gardens, and 4.1, which is to pass a city policy to procure locally grown foods for events and other organized food catering at city managed facilities, and coordinating with other public agencies to encourage them to develop similar policies. Section 8 is climate economy. This section has 4 strategic goals or strategies, including 1, which is to leverage the economic development opportunities of the green economy, and 4, which is to accelerate, 2 I wanted to highlight, which is to enhance community resilience through economic resilience. Example actions include C1.2, which is to explore and prepare for the potential of leveraging federal COVID relief, infrastructure and/or climate action funding for use in Maplewood. And CE 2.1, which is to conduct a planning effort focused on identifying economic vulnerabilities and opportunities, especially those affecting the city's vulnerable populations. And finally, section 9 is adaptation capacity. This section has 4 strategies, including AC2, which is to support equitable climate action, and AC4, which is to establish financing to support the city's climate action efforts. Key actions in this sector include 2.1, which is to develop and incorporate equity metrics in the evaluation of CAP activities, and AC 4.3, which is to establish a policy to capture savings from city facility energy efficiency and renewable energy projects from all city departments, and use that funding to support either additional climate action or additional energy efficiency strategies in the city, for the city. Lastly, section 10 is an implementation section. In this section, we have an overview of just general implementation recommendations and considerations. The first few comments in that section, we just sort of remind or put out there that implementation is for everyone. We should all recognize that clearly this is a city plan, but unlike most municipal plans, climate adaptation and climate mitigation plans are plans which really are not just strategies and actions that the city may take, but it also is for all of us, businesses, households, and individuals to also participate, because we're talking about community-wide shifts that we want to support together. And we should recognize that climate action is a journey. So implementation of this plan should anticipate review periods, and actions should be refined as appropriate based on progress and opportunity through the implementation timeframe. We also, in the report, have some recommendations around building internal capacity. Those are things like funding and supporting sustainability and climate adaptation staffing as appropriate to help support the plan. To continue executing community-wide GHG inventories on a regular basis. We do recommend implementing in some form or fashion a greenhouse gas mitigation planning effort, which would be a companion to this plan, an important piece that can work together with this plan. And then we have some recommendations related to external support, which include things like establishing either the ENR commission or another commission as the council prefers, as a citizen body to support implementation of the plan, suggesting establishing jurisdictional partnerships that can advance the plan. So engaging with Ramsey County, State of Minnesota, Watershed District, et cetera, to work together on implementation. And recognizing that there's an opportunity to provide periodic updates of the climate adaptation plan and its progress to the public through the city's newsletter, which is fantastic. Lastly, we have a few thoughts related to funding. The first is maintaining a budget and identifying funding sources for staff and plan implementation as may be appropriate. We also suggest that the opportunity to identify a budget necessary to support projects on an annual basis. There may be a specific implementation project that may be appropriate on a year-to-year basis, and just reviewing that as a part of the budgeting process. And also, of course, utilizing no-cost technical assistance offerings as available. And they do exist both at the state level as well as at the federal level. And with that, I'll just round it up with any questions, and I'm very appreciative to be able to be here and happy to answer any questions anyone has.
Thank you, Mr. Redmond. I'm sure council members all have questions. I know I do, but I'm going to start with Councilmember Juniman because she has served on the climate adaptation work with all of you on this plan. I know I was on the Zoom call where you initially presented this, and that was very helpful. But let's start with Councilmember Juniman.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, I have to say, give the credit to the rest of the people. I was mainly a listener and reactor, I guess, only from a council perspective. I just think it's mind-boggling what these people could put together for us. And it's not just something that is going to sit on a shelf because it has realistic plans that we could grab onto from some not terribly, some immediate and not as immediate, things we can start to do, things we have for long range planning and so on. And it's an incredible planning tool if you look at it in its entirety. And I also want everybody to, again, pay attention to the fact to how many people said they were very concerned about climate impact for our community. So this is not something pie in the sky. It's something that we are, once again, kind of ahead of the game in some ways to getting started on seeing where this could take us. And the only thing that I have to add is that I've been on the council long enough, and I remember back probably, at least now, probably 15 years, to when we first started having some areas where we had huge impact from rainfall, much bigger than anticipated because we had a policy in place for displacing water at a certain rate, and it just no longer held. It was awful. And we lost some properties. We had to help some people relocate. I mean, this is real. And you think about how long ago that was. And since we can see what's been happening, and it's projected that it's going to happen more often, that we may get water, but we might not get water in manageable amounts. And so that's one of the biggest things, I think, for us as a city offering services to our residents is one of the biggest that we have to worry about. But all of this plan is, I hope everyone who is the least bit interested in this in the community will go online and look at this plan, because it gives you two things, I think. An inkling of what we have to start doing in order to stay ahead of the game and do our part to help mitigate, but also prepare ourselves for how we deal with it as individuals and as a city. And then secondly, to instead of trying to decide whether it's real or not, let's just look at what these things offer us so that we are prepared no matter what happens. That's what the whole point of this is that we want to have a community where people are able to be resilient, and whatever, Mother Nature hands us, we will be prepared to do whatever we can to live a decent life. And I also call council members attention to the fact that our vulnerable communities to things like food insecurity and economic insecurity right now will also be the ones probably most impacted by climate change. So our responsibility as elected officials is huge in this area to protect our city and our residents. And I can't thank Ted Redmond enough. How lucky are we to have him in our city? This is an unbelievable document. Other people from other places look at it and go, wow. And I have to say, I don't think I or most of the city outside of Sean can take much credit for this. I mean, the ENR has done a good job of helping us along the way, and we had a representative on this work group with the people that worked long and hard, but the guidance from Ted has been incredible. We are very fortunate. I'm very excited about this, even though it has some scary parts to it. It gives us a sense of where we could go and be responsible. So thanks to everybody who worked on this. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you.
Councilmember Knudsen.
Well, thank you, Councilmember Judeman. That's quite an endorsement. It was kind of fun when I read this early this morning. I started thinking, what can 40,000 people do, in the city of Maplewood? Just 40,000 that kind of get it. Then I looked at the watershed examples and things we can do with planning commission and zoning. There's parts of this that are public safety. Parts of it are just common sense. Other parts are economic. And so there's just so much in here. And I'm impressed with just the notion that the city council can direct and encourage. But it really comes down to, what the general public thinks about, is this a better life? And I think it really is when you look at everything in here, all the knowledge you have about, if you live on a lake, you shouldn't fertilize right up to the shoreline. You shouldn't mow there's all kinds of things that we learned that's easy to do if you understand the science and the impact. So great plan. I'm going to keep this particular plan and refer to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Knutson. Councilmember Villavicencio.
I have no questions, just echo what everyone else said. It was an extremely thorough plan, and so I appreciate that. Thank you.
Councilmember Cave.
Just a comment. I think this is a wonderful, like Kathy said, a planning tool that we can use in our city. And like Bill said, with collaboration with all these different departments, I think that's one big thing we're seeing in our city is that we have so much collaboration in the city of Maplewood. And I think that is what's made our city so special and able to move forward with so many things because our departments work together so well. And, that being said, this is just another example. Great job, Sean. Great job, Ted, and all your staff and people who worked on it. And I also want to say that I look forward and I am very happy for you guys passing this on and moving it up to the grant, what is it, next week or the week after our council meeting, the next council meeting. You guys did a great job and you deserve a lot of praise. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Cave. I will reiterate what other people have said in terms of looking at this as a very valuable planning tool. I know from a policymaker's standpoint, summer is almost upon us. I can hear people mowing their lawns outside and thinking about flooding and storms. And as policymakers, those are all things that, come to mind. And what can we do in our city to address some of these, what we're seeing as historic storms and flooding is obviously a primary concern looking at things that might happen this summer. From a policy standpoint or policymaker standpoint, some of the things that we're going to need to really roll up our sleeves and look at is costing some of this out and prioritizing. Mr. Redmond, I think you indicated that this really is a 10-year plan. And I think that this is probably a plan that will continue to evolve and it will just simply become part of what Maplewood and other cities do in trying to adapt and to mitigate and to protect our environment, because we all know that there are some significant changes that are happening. And so we will certainly be looking at this from, how do we actually implement this? And one thing can be said about Maplewood is that we don't just talk the talk. We actually walk the walk. And so it's finding ways that we can implement, recognizing that, we've got to figure out costs to some of these things. We also obviously have to prioritize, because just simply in recognizing, what you identified as a 10-year plan, and I think it's an ongoing plan, we're going to need to prioritize and figure out what kinds of things do we need to look at first. So clearly, council members, there is more work to do on this, but what a great work plan we have already started. So thank you, everyone, for tonight's very fruitful presentations. We have a little bit of time. We don't start our council meeting until 7. And so given the fact that we are through our agenda for tonight, I am going to adjourn and we will reconvene at 7 o'clock for our council meeting. I'm going to go get another cup of tea. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Ted. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian Bitterman.